And I do think people are ready to start to go a little bit deeper because by definition, in the Yoga Sutras, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the quieting and the calming of the vrittis being the agitations and the fluctuations of our mind, right? And they come in self-limiting, self-defeating, self-judging, and self-doubting tendencies, right? We all have them. So if we keep coming back to the definition, yoga is to quiet your mind. And so the poses, the physical practice is the means to the end, which is peace of mind.
Welcome to a Curious Yogi podcast. I'm your host, Bobbi, joined by living masters and awakening friends. We're here to illuminate your practice as we explore what it means to walk the yogi's path, unfold peace from within, and live the vision of oneness. I'm so delighted you're here. Now let's get curious. Welcome back to another episode of A Curious Yogi. I love this space. I love exploring the sometimes serious study of yoga in a way that feels delightful and enjoyable. So wherever you are in your journey now, in your spiritual practice, in your sadhana, whether you're an asana-focused yogi, a meditator, someone diving into the richness of the philosophy of yoga, I'm so glad you're here. And I know you're going to love this week's guest, Nicki Doane. But before I introduce Nicki, I have two invitations for those of you looking to deepen your own sadhana. First, the call of the Himalayas is getting louder. We have only one room left for our upcoming retreat in North India. If you've been waiting for a sign to visit the foothills of the Himalayas with two seasoned travelers for yoga, meditation, satsang, hiking, and adventure, then this is it. So if you're thinking, I want to snag that last room before Bobbi and Simon close the retreat doors, get all the information at bobbipaydel.com/Himalayan-retreat. And if you can't make it with us this March, check out Nicki's retreat next year in Rajasthan. She talks about it in the episode and it sounds pretty epic. I love Rajasthan, so highly suggest checking that out as well. Secondly, if you're looking for a consistent spiritual community, I warmly invite you to join a Curious Yogi Patreon page. Our Patreons get access to our monthly satsang where we gather to study and share wisdom and support one another in meeting the miracles of daily life. Hello, Sadhana! And you can subscribe for as little as $8 a month. So, with all those invitations, now we get to the juice of today's practice. Of today's episode. Oh my gosh, yoga teacher mode. Okay. I am beyond honored to introduce today's guest, Nicki Doane. She is a master yoga teacher living on the beautiful island of Maui, and she is truly a teacher's teacher. Nicki has been immersed in the teachings of yoga since 1989. She's traveled to India countless times to study with the greats like Pattabhi Jois and B.K.S. Iyengar, to just name a couple. What makes Nicki so special is her authenticity. She has this incredible ability to take the most fundamental postures and make them feel profound, all while using humor to make the practice safe and joyful. I can attest to this, that in our conversation, she just brought out so much delight in the conversation, and I'm so excited to share it with you. We discussed so much in the episode. Nicki shares her journey from her early days with the masters to developing her own unique approach with her Maya Yoga school. We discussed the vital importance of spirituality in our practice, why yoga should be individualized to you, the transformative power of visiting India to connect with the roots of the tradition, Yes, I love that. It's so important. And also how to navigate the modern yoga landscape with discipline and grace. So, this is such an enlightening conversation. So, let's dive in with the wonderful Nikki. All right, Nikki, welcome to a Curious Yogi podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. And I'm sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. So, I have this raspy voice, but it's
Kind of sounds good. A little sexy.
yeah. I don't know if it's the season over there in Maui, but it's definitely the season here in Sweden. So,
Sweden. I was wondering where you were physically in the world.
yeah, I'm in Sweden. So, but originally from Canada. So, sort of towards your side. Um, yeah, so I just want to jump right into it. I'm super excited to have this conversation. You're like one of the, OG yogis in the US with your extraordinary stories of studying with Pattabhi Jois and the whole Iyengar happening, and just your whole career and your whole yoga life is such an inspiration and super
Thank you.
wonderful to hear about. And I I want to know Nikki now and hear all of your wisdom and live knowledge, whatever, 30, 40 years later. But I also think, just for the interest of the listeners, your story and your background is so interesting. So if you can give us your shortened version of how you came into this journey up until this moment, and then we can leave lots of space for me to ask you all the questions that I have about yoga now and where we're going now.
Great. Great. So thank you for that introduction. Funny to think that I'm an OG now, but I think you're right, actually, and I will own that because I was very fortunate to be able to study with those masters in person on many occasions while they were alive, from Pattabhi Jois to Mr. Iyengar to Desikachar and so many other teachers. So I grew up living overseas. My father was a diplomat, so we lived in a lot of different countries. And my mother thought it was very important for us to have a high school education in the United States, since we were technically US citizens and were most likely going to university and in the States. So we moved back to the Washington, D.C. area when I was about 14, 15, starting high school. Went to high school, and, I had been raised with very conservative parents and nothing kind of hippie-ish or yoga. All I knew about that was kind of, peripheral sort of woo-woo things. And then I actually was when I was in high school, I got very into a band that was very popular in the 60s and until they passed in the 90s, and the name of the band was the Grateful Dead. So it was a lot of hippies, so it blew my mind. I had never seen these kind of countercultural things. I had never even heard of people being a vegetarian, and I didn't really know what yoga was. And I saw both of those things at the concerts. So in my mind, I associated being a vegetarian and practicing yoga with the Grateful Dead. I just thought, okay, well, that's a hippie thing. So, okay, I kind of want to do those things. Then I went off to university in Massachusetts in the Northeast, University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and they actually offered yoga for gym credit. And you needed 3 gym credits to graduate. So I decided to take a yoga class. And I also had just been recently introduced when I got to school to a vegetarian, like dining hall, where students go and eat. And when I went into the dining hall to, have my hippie food, um, I saw all these people that I totally related with. And I thought, oh, I found my tribe. And people were talking yoga, and I was like, "Oh, you can take yoga here?" And they said, "Yeah, they have 3 different classes." So I immediately signed up for the next semester for a class. And I tell you, that class changed my life because I was not a morning person, and I was studying Russian, by the way, because we had lived in Russia when I was younger, and I thought I was going to maybe be a translator political science professor. And I signed up for this yoga class, and it was at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was January. It was very cold. And I remember waking up and have to set an alarm. And I remember thinking this better be a good class. And I trudged across the campus. It was very snowy and really not the time I wanted to be awake. And I went into the class, and I don't know what happened. The metaphor I've always used for that class was that nothing had ever felt so familiar to me. It really felt like I was putting on very comfortable shoes, like boots that had been broken in just for me. And I couldn't believe how I felt. I, s- I only remember the teacher's first name, and I studied with her the whole semester. Carolyn, wherever you are, thank you. Um, and it blew my mind. I had to go tell people I took this yoga class. It was incredible. And I didn't miss a class, and it was at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was very surprising. And it was a very basic class. It was hatha yoga, which I didn't really know what that was at the time. And then they also offered Iyengar yoga and Kundalini yoga. So I did all of those. I did all of those classes. And the last semester of college, I took what I thought was an Iyengar yoga class, but the teacher had recently been turned on to Ashtanga yoga. And that's what he taught. He taught us the primary series. So I was 21 years old, really fit, pretty flexible. And so Ashtanga yoga really connected for me. I loved it. And by a series of circumstances, waiting for a job, having a few months on my own, I got an opportunity to go to Mysore to India to study with Pattabhi Jois in the fall of 1991. And I took it. And what I thought was just going to be sort of a little, toe in the water, another check off my box, turned out to be a completely life-changing experience. I ended up staying for 4 months. I denied the job. I had a job lined up to be a Russian translator, and my parents were horrified. And I fell in love with my husband, who we're not married anymore, but we taught together and traveled together, have 2 children together for 20 plus years. So I would say that was really the start. And over the years, I was able to get to Pune to study with Mr. Iyengar, and I was able to keep going back to India and just live my life kind of like a gypsy, teaching here and there, because Ashtanga yoga, it being such a set sequence, a lot of teachers would leave their studio for months at a time, and you could go in and basically take over their studio because it was always the same thing. So we did that, and we would save money and then go back to India and then go back to work and save money, and just kind of hustling for a while until, it was about 1997. We got married, and we had actually bought a piece of property on Maui, but it was completely raw, nothing on it, off grid. And then I got pregnant with Maya, who is my oldest daughter, who's now 27. And we decided to put some roots down on Maui. So we built a yoga studio here, and it was in the middle of nowhere. It's in the jungle, but by word of mouth, things started to grow, and Maui's such a destination, and it historically has been a big center for Ashtanga yoga. Pattabhi Jois started coming to Maui in the 70s. So, while I always loved Ashtanga yoga because I was young and strong and could do it, I also very much loved Iyengar yoga. I left my first trip in India with pain in my back. I had never had back pain. I was 22 years old. I was very lucky to go study with an Iyengar yoga teacher in Italy. Her name was Gabriella Jubilaro. She's a very senior Iyengar teacher that my ex-husband knew. And she took one look at my back and said, "Well, no wonder your back is sore. You only bend in your lumbar spine." I didn't even know what that meant. And I was like, "Okay, well, can you help me?" And she said, "Yeah." And we spent about 6, 7 weeks there. She taught me how to use my spine more holistically, how to stay in the poses longer, how to use props to get access to action. And it changed my practice. And I left there with no back pain. And God bless, I've never had back pain. But what I realized in that moment that really came to fruition so many years later in Maya yoga is that Pattabhi Jois and Mr. Iyengar, these two seemingly polar opposite practices, came from the same source, right? Their teacher was Krishnamacharya. And when I discovered that, I thought, well, this is silly. Why do I have to pick one or the other? Why can't I do both? Because I find that these practices complement each other so magnificently. So as the years have gone by, I don't teach traditional Ashtanga yoga anymore. I don't teach traditional Iyengar yoga, although I still continue to study with an Iyengar teacher. And I do continue to practice Ashtanga yoga and teach it occasionally. But what really has come out of that is Maya yoga, which is what I teach now, which I hate to say that it's a blend or a fusion but it does draw. That is my background. Those are my roots, those two systems. But I'm very much about the individual. I'm very much about using the props to give people access to the action of a pose and to always remember that yoga is and has always been a spiritual practice. So the Yoga Sutras are something I was exposed to about 3 years ago, and they have really just woven themselves in and become an integral part of my teaching and my practice. So here I am now, still living on Maui, still teaching, incredibly blessed, and really getting behind what I call Maya yoga, because Maya means illusion, right? It's never what you think it's going to be.
Beautiful. Wow. I love how you brought your whole story to that amazing point of the spirituality point, because that's really what I want to question your knowledge
Great.
about, is how you've woven, everything which has come from Krishnamacharya and these physical practices. But how does one, such as myself, a lover of yoga, appreciator of yoga, practitioner of yoga, teacher of yoga, always remember the spiritual aspects of yoga, whether I'm practicing X yoga or Y's yoga? It's just like we're in this so many types of yoga, but how do we keep that purity or that essence of yoga in all the yogas?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I'm constantly thinking about and refining. And first of all, I think it's great there's so many different yoga studios. Okay, I'm never gonna speak ill of any particular system, because I feel whatever gets you in the door, and kind of starts to open your mind to yoga, I think is a good thing. What I've found over the years is perhaps people start in something that's very I don't know, I'll call it yoga light, or just strictly
Yeah.
physical. But often if people are really meant to be in yoga, that it wakes something up in them and they become more curious. And here we are in the curious yogi, right? And then they start to seek out a little bit more. So I love that. So I'm not going to bash any system. However, I do find it interesting nowadays, and I think it's just the culture of so much information that people have become, like ADD to it, an attention deficit disorder. Like we're always looking for the next thing. And in my own mind, I don't understand the need to combine yoga with everything else, yoga sculpt, yoga lattes, yoga with weights, yoga, it's like, I love all those things. I'm going to Pilates this afternoon, right? I go to bar classes. I believe weight training can be a great thing, but you leave that in those places. For me, I don't need to bring sculpt into my yoga class. I don't need to bring Pilates into my yoga class. They're two separate things. Why can't we just honor what is? And I think it's because the Western mind is, unfortunately, likes to pull the surface of things, right? Oh, I like the poses. The shapes are nice, as if it's just a physical thing. But yoga's been popular now for more than 20 years in the West. And I do think people are ready to start to go a little bit deeper because by definition, in the Yoga Sutras, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the quieting and the calming of the vrittis being the agitations and the fluctuations of our mind, right? And they come in self-limiting, self-defeating, self-judging, and self-doubting tendencies, right? We all have that. You know, I read an article by some scientist that said we have upwards of, 10,000 thoughts a day running through our head. Luckily, we don't remember them all, but it's amazing. And many of them are of the afflicted variety. So if we keep coming back to the definition, yoga is to quiet your mind. I was just talking about it in class yesterday. And so the poses, the physical practice is the means to the end, which is peace of mind. So obviously, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about it. Your body is your temple. Mr. Iyengar said your asanas are your prayers. So we have to take care of our body. It's the only one we get, right? However, this is a temporary situation, but the essence of who we are is eternal, right? And most of our suffering happens right up here between our ears. So I think it's very important, and it is my personal responsibility to keep reminding people that yoga is about spirit, that we do have this spiritual body, that it is about quieting our mind, calming our nervous system, so that we can find more peace of mind and ease of heart. So that's my mission.
I love that. And when you're speaking of how in Maya Yoga you're treating the individual or speaking or teaching to the individual, is it also in that way that one individual might respond to a practice similar to Ashtanga or Vinyasa, something more dynamic, where one individual at certain crossroads in life might require a different type of asana or pranayama practice in this way?
100%. I mean, the only constant in life is change. And even Krishnamacharya said that. He taught different things at different stages of his life. And he did, back in the day, with that old style of yoga, you would go and you would study with your teacher. First of all, you would beg them to teach you. It wasn't like a shopping mall of yoga where I'm going to go here. Oh, I'm sick of that person. I'm going to go over here. You would beg your teacher to teach you. You would essentially move in with them and you would do whatever they said. Right? I mean, I'm not saying that that's how it should be now, but there's something to that. You would develop such a deep relationship. See, and to me, that's the juice of yoga, that it teaches us connection. Because what I see in the world is a tremendous case of loneliness. People are lonelier than they've ever been. Mental health is at an all-time low. And so you would develop a relationship with your teacher. The teacher would teach you as much as they felt they had to offer or your capacity. And then they would say, okay, you're done. Now you have to, now you're done. And then the student would say, well, how can I pay you? And in Pattabhi Jois's case, Krishnamacharya said, okay, you're going to teach these series of yoga. You're going to continue to run my school, and you're going to go be a scholar. You're going to continue your studies and teach at the Sanskrit college in Mysore, which is what he did. Mr. Iyengar, he was told, you're going to move to Pune in the north, and you're going to work with sick people and women, which at the time was like, what? I mean, women, ironically, were not really open to practicing yoga. It was just, if you were lucky to have a family member who was a teacher, but it was much more of a male thing. And it was also only for Brahmins back in the day. So it was this very elitist thing. And I believe that Krishnamacharya was really radical because he said that women are the ones that should be practicing yoga more. He said we were more trustworthy. And he said that because we bear children and run families, we need yoga more even than men. So I love that.
Yeah. Okay, I love this, what you're saying. And because when I'm just kind of like thinking of my own mind, obviously, which is where I come to, but also just as someone, observing the world that we live in as well, that like when we think of yoga and also, what you were explaining, people kind of, I'll go there, I'm sick of this person, like I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try this, where like yoga does require a certain set of disciplinary skills and dedication and devotion, and like you're saying, to one teacher or one lineage. And yet there's this sort of conflict within our sort of society of like, no, but I should feel free to do what I want. And like, I don't know. It just feels like there's this kind of gray area that we're existing in as like human beings at this moment, where discipline can serve us and dedication and devotion can serve us, and yet there's this sort of like hesitancy to be too rigid, but yet we kind of need that to get to the depths of yoga.
I agree with you 100%. All this like we can be free. I don't see a lot of freedom in people's beings. I see a lot of suffering. I see a lot of loneliness. And I think people are sort of missing the point. Like a discipline is a commitment, and it creates boundaries in your life. And almost every living creature thrives within a set of boundaries, whether they're self-imposed or it's a system. As far as like dogmatic yoga, I'm not a real fan of that. I question any system of yoga that says they're the only real yoga. I do think that there is a system for everybody, right? Some people definitely gravitate more towards Ashtanga, like me. I was young, very much type A, really liked that physical structure. In fact, when I first started practicing, I just thought it was fun. I was like, oh, yeah, I can make these poses. I'm strong. This is cool. I'm being a hippie. I'm doing all the right things. And then when I got to India, and started being pushed very fast in the practice. Suddenly all these emotions started coming up. And then I was like, ooh, I don't think I like this anymore. And I was so lucky because there were a few older students there who said, no, 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 this is the good stuff. And I remember thinking, no, like, I don't know, this isn't good. I don't like this. Some days I'd leave the practice like really mad. And some days I'd be so sad. And some days I'd feel incredibly joyful. It was always changing. And one of the older students said, you need to read the Yoga Sutras. And I was like, what's that? And they said, oh, it's a really important book for yogis. It's the psychology, philosophy of yoga. And I was like, okay, I want to be a good yogi. Like, do you have a copy? And I'll never forget, I don't have the book in here. It's in the studio, but it was like the thinnest book. And I took it. I was like, no problem. And I went back to my room and I started to read it and I fell asleep. And I thought, maybe I'm just tired. Every time I tried to read that book on that trip in Mysore, I fell asleep. And in my arrogance, I thought it was the book. I was like, oh, maybe it's just not a good version. But one thing that it did give me, and this other student told me, this is normal. These emotions that are coming up, this is what the practice is. It is about your body and your mind coming together. And the breath is that missing link. And, and then, of course, when I went back to the States, I bought so many sutra books, and they all did the same thing to me. They put me to sleep. And then I remembered one thing that Pattabhi Jois had said to me on that first trip. He said two things. One, he said, do your practice and all is coming. So that I was like, you know what? I'm going to put these books down. I'm just going to practice. And maybe I'm not ready for this stuff yet. The other thing he said was two of the highest forms of yoga practice are being in a relationship and having children. And at the time I was so young, I was like, okay, whatever. I think third series looks a little bit harder than that, but he was absolutely right. But it wasn't until 6 or 7 years later, after many, many years of asana practice under my belt, I had a child, that the sutras came back to me and suddenly really started to make sense. And it added such an incredible depth to the practice when I started to realize that yoga is about navigating consciousness, right? What's going on in our head. And so our body all the asanas, all the tools, that's all they are. They're the means. They will get us there, but that's not the goal. The perfection of an asana, yeah, it's cool, but tomorrow you could hurt yourself and you can't do the asana and you're still, and then what? You don't have yoga in your being anymore? Yoga is so much more than the physicality. And don't get me wrong, I love the physicality. And I what I see out in the world and society, people need it. People are not in their bodies. It is a way. It's a doorway in if you do it correctly. In fact, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Hmm. Wow, I
Integrity.
love that too. Yeah. And when you were just speaking about like having this memories of those wise sort of Mahavakyas, like the great saying that Pattabhi Jois instilled in you, and then you think of them later, you remember them later. It just made me wonder, like, what is your opinion or your thoughts on like the importance of having that guru or the like teacher, or that maybe one or couple teachers for someone that's very sincere and devoted to going farther on their yogic path?
I think it's an essential part of it. The student-teacher relationship is an integral part of yoga. That's huge, and finding a teacher that you resonate with and that you trust, that's important too. Because I hate to say it, but there are a lot of false teachers out there, and there have always been. So to be able to find that discerning, in yoga and Sanskrit, it's called viveka, that discriminating awareness, where we find something. And I do always suggest to students, look, find a teacher that you like and stick with it for at least a year. I mean, a year is hardly anything, but, we live in a culture where 2 weeks is forever. So I was like, give it a year, commit to the practice, to the teacher, open yourself to it, as long as you trust them. And it shouldn't be blind, right? You have to develop relationship, but that's the juicy part, right? The relationships are sacred between a teacher and a student. I'm so grateful that I had the time I had with Pattabhi Jois. And believe me, he was a flawed human. Like we're all flawed humans. But the essence of the practice that I got from him, the commitment to study, the discipline, and for me, the physical journey of going to India, which is the source of yoga, was just I'm so blessed that I had that time. And for whatever reason, I had a really beautiful relationship with him. And I was able to set boundaries with him on my very first trip, and they were never uh, corrupted. So I was really fortunate in that way. But I think that
Mm.
relationship is important to have a teacher. That's why I question modern like vinyasa yoga. There's no hierarchy. There's no guru for that. It's just like a free for all. And I think that's sort of sad, because to have a teacher, someone to connect with, to look for guidance. I mean, to give up your whole sense of free will, but to have that relationship is precious.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes me think, for those that are listening who are genuinely curious seekers and spiritual people, whether like interested in yoga as the asana practice or more like the philosophical meditation practice, but just to like go out into the world. And like you said a little bit earlier, that we live in this like information overload, where there's just so much in front of us. And for one that's working to develop that sense of discernment, we're sort of like vulnerable and open to like all that is on display. So how can one, as they're working towards that deeper sense of discernment within, really have the eye to like what is true and genuine and meant for me as a teacher or a lineage to follow?
That's a really good question, and I hear it all the time, because what I'm hearing more and more from students is, first of all, classes are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Like an hour, 45 minutes to an hour is an average class, which for me, get I can barely do a 2-hour class. I mean, I do some shorter ones online, but to really kind of keep your eyes open and pay attention to what you feel. I think I think in our society, for a lot of us, and I'll say women for sure, we've sort of been taught to kind of dull down or not pay attention to what we're feeling. Anda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, he has a wonderful piece in that book where he talks about human beings actually having 6 senses, not just 5, and our 6th sense is our intuition. And he says that all of yoga is to awaken our intuition, which in order to do that, we have to learn how to pay attention. To me, that's one of the most important things that yoga has to offer us, is to learn how to focus our mind and pay attention. So I suggest that you go to classes and you pay attention. You listen to the teacher. Are they actually teaching you how to do something, or are they just telling you what to do? I'm blown away. I just had a class yesterday and I had a few beginners in there, and their form was atrocious. And I thought, oh, they've never gone to a yoga class. So, I'm helping them with their hands. Come to find out after, oh, no, I've been going to so-and-so's class for a while. And I just think, how can a teacher look at a student and not see? But, that maybe they're just not that evolved of a teacher, and I think sometimes modern yoga is too concerned with the playlist, the songs in their classes, than the poses they're teaching or the students in front of them. I'm a teacher. I teach people how to practice yoga, how to bring more fulfillment, attention, joy into their lives. I'm not just about leading people through a sequence of postures. You want to do that, you go somewhere else. There's plenty of places where you can do that. So I do think it does take a level of, if you're like, for me, that first yoga class, I got such a feeling from it. And I was like, I just kept looking to find that feeling again, that sense of connection. And I found it. So, yeah, I think I won't say it's an easy thing to do. I think, unfortunately, yoga has become like another workout in the West. And I do think that we're at a pivotal place now where people are starting to realize, like, okay, like, I don't just want to go to yoga for a workout. Like, I could go to the gym. I can go to Pilates. So I'm like, yes, do those things. Because if you come to yoga, you should leave feeling more connected to yourself, calmer, and able to, interact with the people in your life in a more, I don't know, less stressed out way. That was a long answer.
Hmm.
Sorry.
No, but that was a great answer. And I was thinking it's so fascinating. Actually, I don't know if it's like disappointing or it's just is what it is, but it's like whether you're in Maui, whether I'm somewhere in Canada or Sweden or Europe, it's kind of like this watered down whole world of yoga inspired things
Yep.
happening everywhere.
Yep.
And we can say yoga
Yep.
inspired or yoga appropriated or whatever. And it's like, I just see like how rare, like, to have that experience that you had at your first yoga class or I had at
I
my
know.
first yoga class. It's like becoming, it seems more and more rare and unique to have those experiences, which just like spark up what just really yoga, which I mean, you kind
It's so
of
true.
one would have to go, again and again to many different in classes, but then to find that teacher or that feeling that brings them the inspiration that there is something here for me, because I think
Yeah.
it's also a world that it can feel exclusive, that I can't do yoga because I can't touch my toes, or I can't sit to
All
meditate
the
because
time.
I can't. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's so it's kind of just, I guess it is what it is. So then my next
Yeah.
question, I guess, is to you, in terms of West yoga in the West, like, where do you feel that we're headed when you say we're at a crossroads?
Well, in my if I'm leading the charge, and I know there's people like me, is to keep coming back to the original meaning of yoga. I mean, we can't improve on yoga. It just is, right? So we can bring our authentic voice to it. We can bring our our lived experience, that sense of pratyaksha. But what I where I want to see it go is bringing people more peace of mind, where we are focusing more on the breathing. To me, the breathing is the soundtrack of your experience. I mean, I don't want to say don't play music in your yoga classes because people are very attached to that now, but maybe take 5 minutes at the beginning and 5 minutes at the end for silence, right? Just to sit with your breath and watch what comes up, because that's real. Because when you get home and you get in your bed at night and you're quiet, all your vrittis are going to start to surface. So it's like, if yoga isn't helping you in your life, because I call it life support, then I don't know. I mean, I would like to see a direction more where we're acknowledging that yoga is a spiritual practice. And that leads me to a point that came up a couple of months ago in a training where someone said to me, well, nowadays you're not supposed to say namaste in your yoga class. Have you heard these things? And I said, what? And they said, well, it's like cultural appropriation. I said, oh, well, that's interesting. My yoga teachers have always been from India. Namaste is a greeting. I honor and respect the light inside of you as it reflects back to me. How is there anything wrong with that? And they said, well, there's a system, like a style of yoga or something. Well, not a style, some studio. I think it's called Yoga 6. I'm going to call it out. And apparently they don't use any Sanskrit. They don't use any, no spirituality, no ohms, basically nothing yogic, and they call it yoga. And I had a teacher in one of my classes last year, and I said, well, I don't understand. And she said, well, it's because everyone's, yoga cultural appropriation. We don't use any of that stuff. And I looked at him and I said, well, why do you call it yoga? And he said, oh, well, I never really thought about that. I said, you're taking everything yogic out of it. That is cultural appropriation. To take everything that is of the essence of yoga and still call it yoga, that's appropriation. And it was funny because he said, oh, I never really thought about that. I said, well, you should.
Yeah, I guess then you take yoga out of the name and you can just call it stretching and,
Well, yeah, call it what it is. If it's Pilates, go to Pilates. I love Pilates, but there's
Yeah.
there's not a shred of spirituality in a Pilates class. In my bar
Yeah.
class, there's no spirituality, which is fine. I'm not going there for that. I go to my yoga practice for that. I go to my meditation for that. I just, I just think, I think that people are reaching critical mass with the lack of connection with each other. People are lonely, right? Like I said, mental health is at an all-time low. So if there's a way to get people to feel more connected, and I think it is through yoga. I think yoga can heal the planet. I think it can help us learn how to connect with ourselves so that we can then connect with the earth and then connect with each other, because that's the wealth of life, are the relationships that we have with each other. At the end of life, the stuff, it doesn't mean anything if there's no one around. So cultivating relationship, to me, is what yoga is about.
Mm, beautiful. And I'm going to ask a question now because I just got inspired. It's more of a selfish question for me as a yoga teacher, to you as like a teacher's
Sure.
teacher. I have a question about, like, when we think about building relationships and making people feel safe to explore their bodies and everything. Like, I teach in some studios where not only is the spiritual part not really invited, but also adjustments and hands-on and those kind of like where other studios are more like welcoming. Are you trained? Okay, good. You can do it. And I'm just like wondering what your sort of standpoint is on that, because we do live in a yoga world where there are many people not qualified or skilled or knowledgeable to give safe hands-on and just, but what's your just like thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I come from an Ashtanga yoga background, so physical adjustments were always a part of it, and I do still do them. I'm not willing to crank a person into a pose. They have to partly be there. And, after, this is crazy, but I've been teaching yoga now for 34 years. I always ask before I give an adjustment. I always ask, does this feel okay? I'm going to put my hands on your hips. You tell me if this feels okay. Even though I know it's a great adjustment and I've seen so many bodies, I always ask because, yes, we are living in an age where some people don't want it, and if people don't
Mm.
want an adjustment, I don't take it personally anymore. I used to take those kinds of things personally, but I don't anymore. And so, yeah, I do think that you have to be respectful and you have to ask. I do also take offense isn't the word, but this sort of idea now, because the way I start my class, when I introduce myself, I talk about this mantra that we chant. It's called the Shanti Pod. It's essentially the student-teacher agreement. And then I say, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do in this class except pay attention. And there's no up-leveling and there's no freestyling. If you need a modification for something, you ask me. But this is not the class where you get to do your own thing. And I've had so many teachers say, "Oh, I really loved that you said that. Can you write that down for me?" And then
Yeah.
occasionally, and recently though, I have had a student say, "Well, what if my body wants to do this?" And I was like, "Well, then if your body wants to do that, you should stay home and practice at home. This is a class. We're moving together. I'm taking you on a journey, and it is completely disrespectful for you to do your own thing in my class. And if you're not comfortable with that, there's the door and you can leave." And they're like,
Mm.
"Oh." But I set those boundaries at the very beginning because I think it's incredibly obnoxious in my mind when people start banging into handstands and doing crazy poses because it's distracting to the other students. It's disrespectful to the teacher. And why are you there? To feed your ego? You want to do your own practice? Stay home. Put it on
Mm.
Instagram like everybody else.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I love all of that, but I want to go back to our spiritual angle of this conversation
Please.
because I just know that that's really what the listeners of this show love is the deep
Yeah.
aspects of yoga and me also. And I want to ask you about like what your thoughts as someone who early in your yoga journey went to India. Me, I also very early in my yoga journey have gone to India and go every year, and I find
Yeah.
it such an essential part of my own practice of like filling that cup as like getting to the source. Do you recommend to your teachers and those that you train and those that are actually serious about this path to go to India and have those experiences for themselves?
100%. India is the source. I couldn't wait to go. Yeah, and I fell in love with India. And in spite of the poverty, in spite of the pollution, in spite of the whatever, it is the source. It is a country where spirituality is just so interwoven into the culture. I love being in that vibe everywhere you go. The gods, the goddesses, and it's something I always have to explain to people. Hinduism is the religion. Yoga is not a religion, right? All Hindus are not yogis. All yogis are not Hindus. However, we do share a lot of the gods and the goddesses and the stories and the mythology. But to go to the source, I'm such a fan of that. So yeah, in fact, I've taken groups to India twice. I'm taking another group there next year. We're going to focus in Rajasthan. Last year I took a group and it was really through my yoga roots. We spent time in Mysore. We went to Pattabhi Jois's yoga shala. His daughter and his granddaughter are running it now. Uh, but just to be in that history. So yes, if people are interested in yoga, I say absolutely go. Go see the temples, go soak up the vibe, and just go sit in a temple, and just meditate, breathe, just be in that culture, absorb yourself in it. It's life-changing. It's such a phenomenal place. Yes, I think every yoga student should make a pilgrimage to India at some point in there. yoga life.
And I will definitely plug the retreat link on the show notes. But for those that are listening, so you're taking them next year. I think it's in February. I saw on your website to
February,
Rajasthan.
yes.
What's the itinerary? What's the focus when you go?
Well, India is such a huge country. You can't do all of India in a trip unless you're taking someone there for a year. The first trip I took 5 years ago, we focused more in the north, right? We went to Varanasi, we went to Rishikesh, we went to Dharamsala, we went to the Taj, um, and that was incredible. And then last year I took a group to the south of India. Now, the south of India really has my heart because that's where my yoga roots are. So we went to study with my teacher in Bangalore. So my teacher lives in Bangalore now. We went to Mysore to see that. We went to Vijayanagar, which is, the original seat of the, of the Indian, the country, like the kingdom created there. And I wanted to take them to Rajasthan because I went to Rajasthan 30 years ago and fell in love with that. It's such a rich culture. When we think of, old school India with, the turbans and all the, tie-dyed clothing and the sparkly clothes and the beautiful, the forts and the desert. And that is Rajasthan. And it's such kind of a magical place. And I've been really dying to get back there. And I work with this wonderful British woman who's been leading, tours in India for 43 or 4 years now. And so she's my logistical person and the yoga teacher and basically the caretaker of everyone on the trip. Like I spend time with everyone. And I saw 2 students yesterday who were on my trip last year and they're like, we can't wait to go on the next one. And I love that they just, I have so many students who are like, I want to go to India. I'm afraid to go by myself. I want to go with you. So it wasn't until my kids were, out of high school that I was like, okay, now I have the space and time to go. Cause, I do a 2-week trip. That's about, I think that's enough for me to be with them. And then some people stay on a bit. But Rajasthan is just a magical place, and they have an incredible tiger preserve and you get a feeling of old India. Whereas now, like going to Bangalore to study with my teacher, he lives in an older neighborhood, but Bangalore has exploded, right? It's the Silicon Valley of India. Even the road between Bangalore and Mysore now, you'd think you were on the freeway in LA. I mean, India is changing at a phenomenally rapid pace. So I want to take people to Rajasthan to get a sense of sort of the old India, to still be in these old, they're called Havelis, which are the old homes and like small fort castles that we'll be staying in. So just to give a little more richness to the culture. But I
Sounds
love
magical.
turning people on. Yeah.
And I love that you go to different places so that people know, okay, every other year I can go with Nicki and explore some place in India and do yoga and get to the heart of it, which
and I teach every day in the morning. Yeah. So we start off with yoga and meditation, and then we have these adventures together. And the thing, you've been to India, it can be very overwhelming on your senses, right? There's most people, if they grew up in, the US or even in Europe, they've never seen poverty like they see in India. The smells are different. Everything is different, an assault sort of on the senses. And to be able to hold a container of people and guide them through that, I find that incredibly fulfilling, right? For them, for me to share something that I love and a place that has had such an incredible impact on my life and my work and my career is amazing to be able to share that.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, just to wrap up this amazing conversation, it's been so inspiring. And I'm just like, I hope one day I get to come to Maui, take class with Nicki Doane, or you get to come to Europe or something of that likes. But just to wrap up, I just ask the last 3 quick questions. And the first one is, at this point in your spiritual practice, is there anything you're still curious about?
I'm curious about everything. I'm curious about the the ability to observe our consciousness. I was just having a conversation last night with a girlfriend who studies Waldorf education, Steiner. I don't know if you've ever heard of and so much of Steiner's teachings are really rooted in yoga. Steiner's obviously much newer, it's like in the 40s, but just this idea of consciousness, of how we're able to observe our own thinking, right? I find that amazing. Just continuing to navigate consciousness and to dig in a bit to understand why we do what we do. I think, and just being comfortable with being quiet. Like it's hard for people to be quiet. So I relish the moments of quiet, of sitting, and then being able to take that and instill it, teach it to my students is a blessing.
I love it. Thank you. Okay, the next one is if you have, you did say a couple that Pattabhi Jois had given you, but like a Mahavakya, a great saying that you have that's carried with you or that you share with your students, that like one nugget of wisdom.
Well, I'm going to take it from Pattabhi Jois because I learned it on the first trip and I still find it so incredibly relevant. He said, yoga is 99% practice, 1% theory. And it's so true. You have to have a practice. Any teacher, question a teacher that doesn't have a practice, right? Because your practice is your wellspring for your teaching. You can read a lot of books, you can listen to people talk about it, but until you have that pratyaksha, the direct experience, as Patanjali says, that's the best way to know something. So I really love that. And then the one that I tend to teach from that, I don't know, I'll say it came from me because I can't credit it to any other teacher, is that how you do one thing is how you do everything. So to cultivate integrity, whether it's in your poses, in your speech, and how you interact, like that's the process. How you do one thing is how you do everything.
Beautiful. I love it. And finally, if you can sum up this conversation in one sentence.
Oh, sum up this conversation in one sentence. Well, it's been a joy to speak with someone and a community that is open to yoga as a spiritual practice, that is open to the remembering of the things we have forgotten. That was from a teacher, Rama Jyoti Vernon, right? Yoga is the remembering of the things we have forgotten. And I do believe that spiritual nugget, that pearl that is within all of us, is just waiting to be uncovered. Right? And I think that would be such a healing for humanity, right? If we can tap into that. And that's not religion. It's not dogma. It's spirituality, recognizing God within each and every one of us. And if God's a word that you don't like, then pick a different word.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much, Nicki. It's been such
pleasure.
an honor and delight. You're amazing. And I know that the listeners of this podcast are really going to love this episode. So I'll be plugging all your the website and everything and all your upcoming retreats. I know you have a couple retreats in Maui every year. And
I do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happening.
I appreciate all of that. And if you come to Maui, come find me at my yoga.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider supporting the show at patreon.com/acuriousyogi-podcast. And please leave a review. It really helps the show reach more people. Let's stay curious, connected, and keep walking the path together. In total delight, this is Bobbi signing off until next time.